All right, good morning. So today we're going to cover very interesting halachas. What is the bracha for a banana, and what is the bracha for other things? For example, papaya. These things we seem to think they're straightforward, but actually they're not so straightforward. What about aubergine? Aubergine also seems quite straightforward, but what attack of the brachas? Bananas, everyone thinks straightforward. We make a ber priadoma, and that's indeed what we do. But actually, there's discussion about it. And what's the discussion? So the background I gave yesterday is that it's based on a Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara in Brachos says, "Heichem avarchin ber praetz." When do we make a ber praetz? The Gemara in Brachos daf mem. And when do we make a ber priadoma? So the Gemara says, "The chishakles lepeira isel gavza." If the gavza remains, then you take the fruit, then you make a ber praetz. But if the gavza is sort of gone away, ki chishakles leperi lesel gavza, then you make a ber priadoma. So the question is, what is the gavza? So that is the three machlokas. The Rosh and Taisus say that it's talking about the roots of the plant. Rashi lands talking about the branches, and the Goinim say that it means the trunk of the tree. Now the banana is going to be enough gemina. Why? Because the banana bush every year it disappears. The actual tree above the ground, but the roots are still there. So if you learn, like the Rosh and Taisus, that the roots have got to actually disappear, then it's not yet, they're still there. So that makes it into a ber praetz. So according to Rosh and Taisus, you would make a ber praetz on a banana. However, we paskin like the Goinim, and the Goinim say that the definition of gavza is the trunk, the main central stem of the tree. And since the stem of the tree has disappeared, then it does indeed classify as a ber priadoma. Now the shaila is, what if by mistake you made a ber praetz on a banana? So that we'll see in the footnote. That is a debate. But this is the background. So it's just before, and again it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words in the Shulchan Aruch. That's it. So it says the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Gimel, in Reish Gimel Sif Gimel, al hamazish ber priadoma. So if you look in the Targum at the bottom, bananos, right? They're bananas. So that is the Targum for banana. So on a banana you make a ber priadoma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, gam kein hatam kamoy betutim, for the same reason as the tutim. Now if you take a look at note 11, this is the interesting note. Mavua shebirchas bananos hi ber priadoma. B'teras vadai katutim. In other words, there's no sofek. We make a ber priadoma on bananas. End of story. Because there's a new trunk, a new bush comes from the roots, and therefore that classifies as a ber priadoma. That's because, again, we're following the Goinim. K'mavur b'sefer k'seis hashulchan. V'im kein mi shemevarich aleihem ber praetz lo yotza. Since we paskin, you make a ber priadoma on a banana, b'teras vadai. If you made the wrong bracha, then no good. K'mavur b'mishnah berurah lekamon. Legabi kol eitz she'einu miskayim b'choyref. That in the winter it disappears. V'hakseis hashulchan shekosvu she'os b'diavad. Okay. V'chein achiach b'shad shuvas er letzion she'onu noiktim she'bananos on einon pre-eitz b'teras vadai mikach she'onu oichlenos on vein choshim lekach she'en orla af misofik. And because, by the way, all of these things that we're talking about is not only about which bracha we make, whether you classify something as a ber praetz or ber priadoma, it also has enough gemina about orla, because orla only applies to fruit trees. So if you classify this as a banana bush and not a fruit tree, no problem, you can eat it in year 1 and 2 and 3. And there's no problem of hashchosas, ilanas and things like that. So it's not only about brachas. V'hoisif, I'm just in the beginning of about 10 lines down. The first word of the line. V'hoisif in note 11. She'ilu haya sofik b'davar haya l'shulchan aruch lashmienu she'birchosim ber priadoma rak misofik. The Shulchan Aruch should have told us this is only a bracha of hadoma misofik. Kadei shelo nitzil achshav she'ein b'zeh sofik arla. That we shouldn't, to think that there might be a sofik arla. So we take on that there's no shaila of arla at all with bananas. Now, and therefore, when mitam zeh das hagon Rabbi Yashav, shebe'ofen sheyesh lefonav pre-eitz ubanana. Very interesting. So if you've got in front of you a definite ha'etz, for example, you've got a grape, you've got an apple, and you've got a banana in front of you as well. You should make a ber pro'etz first, and then you make a ber pradom on the vav. Don't worry that maybe you've been yotze your bracha on the banana with the bracha you made on the vadai hoetz. So when it comes to bananas, we seem to paskin that you make a ber pri hadoma b'toras vadai, because we paskin like the gainim, and since the bush disappears and the shroshim stay, it's not considered a proper ilan. Now, what about chatzilim? Chatzilim, interestingly, we call it aubergine here in England, and in Eretz Yisrael, I think in America as well, it's called eggplant. The reason is, by the way, that aubergine is a French word. I looked it up. Aubergine is a French word, and that is how the Europeans refer to chatzilim. But Americans typically call it an eggplant. Now, why eggplant? What in Australia? What? Eggplant. And why eggplants? Because the original aubergine that was brought to North America by the immigrants, they looked like white eggs. You know, can you picture an aubergine in the plant? I don't know if you see it. If you Google it, you'll see it. It's a plant. It looks like sort of like it's hard to describe, but they look like little white grapes. They're small. They're clusters of these things, and therefore they called it eggplant. So the shaila is, what is the nature of chatzilim? So what bracha do you make? Is it ber pradom or ber pro'etz? So legabe chatzilim, I'm in the second paragraph of footnote 11. Kosav Birkei Yosef sheyesh oimrim sheim nechshavim ke'etz. They are ber pro'etz v'yesh bam isa arla. Now that's the interesting thing, because it goes together. If you make a ber pro'etz, that means you classify it as a fruit. Then there's a shail of arla as well. Kivin shehem goydlim be'ilon. For kivin she'ilon zeh ein miskayim yosef mishalosh shanim. The difficulty is that this tree, an aubergine plant, doesn't last for more than 3 years. So therefore, if you're going to classify an aubergine eggplant as ho'etz, and therefore it's got a problem with arla, you're never going to be able to eat it, because the aubergine plant doesn't last for more than 3 years. So bang goes your aubergine and your Friday night dips and however else you like your aubergine, etc. So what you can do, ein shaykh lechel klal chatzilim, because if you classify it as oez, then it's always caught by being arla, mishum isa arla. Achevi sheroiv hagdolim meirim bezeh heta she'ena dinakeiz. They say no. Aubergine, chatzilim, eggplants are considered the ber pradoma. Kivin shebederech klal ilan she'oitze peres hoilich mashpiach b'chol shona. There are other definitions of what a tree is, not just the roots and things like that, but it gets better year on year. And with the aubergine, with the chatzilim, with the eggplant, is the other way around. The first year, the quality of the fruit is best. It gets worse. It gets a bit more bitter. And the third year, it's so bitter you can hardly eat it. And that itself indicates that it's a vegetable and not a tree. And so to the Chaim and the Chaznish, etc. And therefore the minhag ha'olam is to make a ber pradoma on chatzilim, and we're not worried about arla at all. And they say the Arizal ate it, and the other people ate it, and if they ate it, then memele it can't be hoetz, because it must be that there's a shail of arla, and if they ate it, you can't have it more than 3 years anyway. So it must be they obviously treated it as a ber pradoma. So hayotz midvarenu is bananas. You make a ber pradoma, and so too with chatzilim, with aubergine as well. But it's interesting to know that it's not so straightforward. Okay, let's finish off. Dalet al peres shemotzin ilone strak. Those fruit which ilone strak means like a barren tree, which don't really produce fruit. They're just sort of these sort of sharp berries and things like that. They're not really fruit, and therefore you make a shahakal on them. Says the Mishnah Berurah Dalet, hey shahakal. They're not considered fruit-like enough to make a ber pro'etz. The kamoi eitz ba'almanin, it's like wood. And they're not considered like the tutim, the berries that we spoke about yesterday, to chashuvin al kol ponim pri, which are at some level considered pri. v'hu ilan strak, even though they're sort of they produced on some sort of bush like an ilan strak, deim tovim lachila chaim kashem shoyim harbe alasnei misbashlin, that you leave them long time and you can cook them, then you can eat them. It's just that the tree is not a perennial. It doesn't it's not like an apple tree which is there all year round and the fruit just appears. Aval kan, but here Ma'ir repairs gruim. These tutim referred to in Sif Dalad are very inferior, very very poor quality. Could go into puchim katanim, like very tiny apples, va'agasim, and tiny pears katanim, hagdelim ka'atzeya. You go in the forest, you see these sort of berries. She'enam ru'uyim lachila kashem chaim. You can't eat them raw. V'alkein ein mechashuvim kechlal pri. Vafilu bishlam, they're not called fruit at all, even if you were to cook them. V'lochein mevorech aleim shahakal. That's why the mechaber paskins that these types of berries you make a shahakal. Ve'egoizim katanim hanilkotim ba'atzei hayah, and these small nuts that you see in the forest, sheim tovim lachil, which are good to eat, pre-gomerhu, they're considered proper fruit, u'mavorech al zeh bori prioetz, and therefore on these nuts you would make a bori prioetz. V'chein al eggus, Russian Ashkenaz, kester, berin, all different types of berries, whatever they are. Afshe gedelim al kaitzim v'nagu hoilim mavorech bori prioetz. Even though they grow on thorns and things like that, you make a bori prioetz. Aval al pre-odoim shegidl al kaitzim, these red berries that grow on thorns, shekorin beloshen Ashkenaz anputin, v'cholshkein al aminim shegidl al atodim, which are grown on these bushes or thorns, v'korin beloshen Ashkenaz shloim keshen. Does he translate that? Keshen cherries. Yeah, he says at the bottom min duvdavon. Like kirsch and what's it called, the liqueur, beloshen poilin panitzas, whatever, mavorchin shahakol she'ena chashuvin v'gam shegdein al atodin. Okay, so generally speaking, these tiny berries which are bitter, not considered fruit, you make a shahakol. That's dalit. Okay, sif hey. B'nei aso afagav de bishlon v'havyon peirus kapeirus eina mevarech ele shahakol. So again, another type of berry, you only make a shahakol on those. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you've got involved. Hainu anovim katanim. These are types of very sort of small grape type things. Sherigin limotze bahadasim, that you sometimes find on a hadas, on the hadas myrtle leaf. You find these little berries. And the shahakol, deloi chashivi v'havilu kapeirish motzin elonei strak. They're not considered choshev fruit, and therefore they're like these little sharp berries that are produced by these barren trees, and therefore you make a shahakal on those. It's hard to identify exactly what they all are. Okay, Vov. Al zangvil. Zangvil is ginger. Shemarakchim oisom k'shehurotov. Now when they're wet, which means a bit moist, you crush them, you grind them, and then on that you make a ber pradoma. V'nireh shehu adin. So too, if they dry out and you crush them, so too you make a ber pradoma because it is roi lachila, and therefore they have a status of a vegetable. The hazangvil ikka the root of the zangvil, you also make a ber pradoma on that. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotzen Ches, shemerakchim oisoi. Ashminon is telling us that alidei rikuach, through grinding it, shemerakchim oisoi bidvash. Even if you add honey to this ginger, it doesn't change its bracha than if you were to eat it raw. Whether you eat it dry or raw, or cooked, or raw, you still make a ber pradoma. After zangvil yovesh ein mevarchin olav klal. If it's dried ginger, you don't really make a brach on it at all. But siman reish beis if tezayin hachad alei rikuach naser lachila. Because dry ginger is not really edible, but if you crush it and you make it somehow ready to eat, then it retains its status as a ber priadoma. And don't ask me a kasha from egoizrach, from this soft nuts, because there we said, when you crush the nuts and you add honey, you make shahakal on this concoction. There, it had never ripened into become a nut, into become a fruit. Here, the zangvil, the thing had sort of developed. It's just that because it was dry, you couldn't really eat it. But when you therefore masaken it somehow, and you crush it and you make it back into a ginger, therefore it retains its status as a ber pradoma. Vuadin kishemrakin pilpul innovation, when you crush pepper, gam kein Brachos ber pradoma, you would make a ber pradoma. I guess that's when you see the bits of pepper, like you see the granules and like that. Then you would make a ber pradoma if you were to eat pepper straight. Okay, roy lachila. The Gemara talks about using pepper as sort of like a mouthwash, so to give you fresh smell. So it seems back in the day you would eat it. Yeah. I don't see people nowadays do that, but yeah. Roy lachila v'chein kashetzoilin zangvel, when you roast pepper, va'oichlin oisel refu, and you eat it for medical purposes. Given the chazi lachila dekach, that because then it stays and you keep its bracha. Avol tzitzur mevarich shahakal. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Given the ovid the time of v'lacha, because the time is gone, the taste of it goes. V'lachin, you can't really eat it. Merkachas shel chazeres shekurin chrein. Yeah, Brachos shahakal. If you crush chrein into then you make a shahakal. Avol merkachas shel reitich. Reitich is tznoin, a radish. Mashma mekama achrein in the Brachos ber pradoma. On radishes you make a ber pradoma. Even if you make some sort of food out of the clipper of the radish, again you still make a ber pradoma. Hazang v'ika. Now, if you take the root of this ginger, afilu rikchu avid gilulim. Interesting. Even if a guy, even if a non-Jewish person crushes it, it hasn't got a shaila of bishul akum. Why? Because you're allowed, you can eat it raw by adding a bit of sugar, and anything which you can eat raw hasn't got a din of bishul akum. Avol shah kol mine peris yirakus v'chein alev rodim, these types of leaves, kol she'en roy lechol esechai, anything which has to be cooked in order to eat it, in bishlon or rikh nochri asur mishum bishlo of the gilulim. Yeah, there are two. We'll just finish with. We've got a few minutes. We'll just quickly do Zayin and Ches, very short. The rule for bishul akum is two criteria. A, it's oila shulchan melachim, it's got to be choshev, and B, it's got to be that you have to cook it. But if you can eat it raw, then it's no problem with bishul akum. So he's saying over here, this radish, there's no problem with bishul akum because you can eat it raw. Okay, let's just do Zayin and Ches. Zayin, besomim shechukim, ground spices, mu'ravim im sukkah, which you add sugar to it, ha besomim ikka, u'mavarich aleihem kadin brachas oisim besomim. The besomim is still the ikka, not the sugar, and therefore you make a bracha on whatever the besomim were. Says the Mishnah Berurah Yud Beis, shechukim hainu. Af shehem shechukim v'nimochim, even though they're crushed and pulverized, legamre, at she'ein nikka bohem ta'aron, that their original form has not stayed, the original klal, afilu hochi le nishtanis brachas na dezel kula alma, the derech ha-besomim lichlish, because that is how you treat pesomim. You crush them. That's just the ofen of eating it, and therefore they retain their brach of hadom or whatever it may be. Ha pesomim ikka hainu afilu k'shasukkah haroiv. Even if the majority is indeed sugar, u'ma'at pesomim, u'chein shenagin beinenu lasois mogin pulua, whatever that is, avaka lekeva, whatever that is. Shemarvin sukkah harbe im engber. In Zangvin with this ginger, kosush, afilu hachi ha'ing be'ikka v'atzukah tafel lahen. At the end of the day, you're adding sugar to sweeten it, but the ikka is the pesomim. The ein rak lemaske ve'ein levarich aleihen. Okay, ches tznoin radish mevarich alav b'priadoma, says the Mishnah Berurah. Tznoin the afal gav shesoifer lahakris ka'etz. Even though if left, it will become very hard and wood-like. Im ein tolsha be'it if you don't pick it at the right time. Afilu hachi mevarich alav b'priadoma. Because people plant it in order to eat it when it's moist and fresh and nice. Even though and therefore, again, what emerges from all of this is bananas, aubergines, radishes, all these things we make a ber pradoma. Not for now, but just there's a very interesting footnote on number 19 about chocolate. Chocolate really should be a ber praetz. It's very unclear why we don't make a ber praetz on chocolate. The minhag ha'olam is to make shahakol, and if you ever look into it, if you want to look into it, there's a long footnote, Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Yashav, etc. But the minhag is to make a shahakol on chocolate, even though it's a bit questionable why indeed that is the case.